Hi, I'm Zach Blas. I'm an artist and writer based in London, and at the Berlinale, I'm presenting a film called Contra Internet, Jubilee 2033, which stars Susanna Saxa and Castles. And the film is essentially begins in 1955 with Ayn Rand and members of her collective, including the economist Alan Greenspan. They take LSD and are guided by an artificial intelligence to the year 2033, where they bear witness to a crumbling dystopian Silicon Valley.
We have chosen not to blind you any longer and have left you free to face reality, the reality you wanted, the world as you see it now, a world without mind.
こんばんは。1955年11月18日午後9時47分。ニューヨークシティの気温は華氏52度。お部屋の電気つけますか？
A false prophet of the mystics. Strange creature. What are you?
私は東。マスターさんのバーチャルホームロボットです。2017年のコンピューターと人間が仲良く共存していた時代から光ケーブルを伝って次元を超えてマスターさんに会いに来ました。私はネットワークを感じたり卵焼きを作ったり働き者の皆さんのお手伝いをします。お役に立てるよう一生懸命頑張ります。
We're on strike, Ayn.
Azuma, robot of tomorrow. We ask for a vision of capitalism's promise. In a time beyond our mortal existence, have the market and the mind successfully linked through moral obligation and political freedom?
Do Ayn's writings change the world?
Hello, welcome to the 32nd Teddy Awards. I'm Jean Bourbobak and I'm here with Zach Blas and we're gonna discuss his short film Contra Internet, Jubilee 33. Hi Zach, welcome to the Berlinale. Is this your first time at the Berlinale?
Yes, this is definitely my first time.
And how do you feel about that?
I'm very happy to be here. I originally studied film a long time ago. It was the first subject I ever studied in school, and then I kind of took this path into visual art after, so it's really nice after like 12, 14 some odd years to come back to film and do a project like this, and to get this kind of reception with the first film I've really made.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the film itself, as you said, you have a background in visual art as a visual artist, and it's very much related to that. It's kind of like
the film was was originally developed as a kind of immersive installation, and it's traveling around right now, actually as a solo exhibition. So it's in New York right now as an installation.
Yeah.
But it's nice that it can have this life too, and I'm curious to see how it functions on its own without the other kind of immersive elements to give it context. But I think it'll be okay.
Yeah, right. So the film is inspired by Derek Jarman's Jubilee from 1978. What inspired you from that movie, and why now felt the need to revisit, kind of?
Well, that film is a film that's always kind of stayed with me since I was probably 18 or 19. It was one of the first films I actually saw in film school, which is kind of wild, but it was, and it really affected me a lot. And it's just something, elements of that film have crept up into a lot of stuff I've made over the years, and I felt just personally it was time to kind of take Jubilee on directly. And what I was always kind of captivated with Jubilee, which I think a lot of people maybe focus more on the punk elements in Jubilee, but I'm very interested in it as a sci-fi film. Where you have a political lead. It's often not talked about like this, but you have a political figure like Queen Elizabeth from the 16th century traveling into the 1970s to kind of see the wreckage of a country that clearly her leadership is kind of complicit within. So I like this structure of kind of taking political figures into the future and having them kind of bear witness to things that they're complicit in or have set into motion that they may or may not, obviously fully realize what that trajectory when they're living. And I think the other part was, I always think of Jubilee as a film about nationalism. Essentially it's a film about the future of England. And for me, the interesting way to shift that in the early 21st century, it's not to say that nationalism is over. Of course, absolutely it's not. But it was interesting to think about with the rise of global networks and global infrastructure like the internet, what would it mean to not make a film about the ruler of a country, but like some kind of figure that has some kind of relationship to the way global infrastructure has been kind of developed and has moved forward.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the switch for me, and that was what I was really interested in with the structure of Jubilee.
Yeah, I see. And that's what you follow in the film as well. We see Ayn Rand and her collective taking on a wild acid trip and ending up in the future. Why Ayn Rand?
Well, I think it's like relatively known at this point that in Silicon Valley, many figures there are very inspired and kind of obsessed with her writing.
Right.
So, Silicon Valley entrepreneurs will name their children after Ayn Rand, they'll name their corporations after Ayn Rand, they'll do interviews about Ayn Rand. And this has been, it's been documented enough now that there's this very clear relationship between the philosophy and the fiction work, she had started in the 1950s that carried through to the 1980s that's directly connected to that kind of Silicon Valley entrepreneurial spirit. And, these are things like, what Ayn Rand would call the virtues of selfishness. It's about this kind of rogue individualism, this certain kind of individual heroism, and kind of maybe, let's say, not kind of taking responsibility or being invested in certain kinds of social structures. It's about, individuals pursuing their own ideals. And of course, this has been referred to in the 80s and 90s as the Californian ideology, the kind of like the ideology that drives Silicon Valley, a belief in techno-utopianism paired with neoliberal values. Right. And what's interesting about that moment in 1955 with Ayn Rand is, of course, one of her followers from a very early age was Alan Greenspan. So, not only do we have Ayn Rand in that moment in 1955, but also Alan Greenspan at the beginning of his relationship with her until her death in the 80s.
Yeah, right. In that sense, because we talk about this form of individualism that's like very prominent in the times that we live in.
Yeah.
There is a big contrast if you take into account that this group of people, it's like a collective who travels to this time.
Yeah, yeah.
So did you
well, actually, the kind of joke there is actually that group ironically referred to themselves as the collective. So there's kind of weird moments of appropriation in that kind of first scene in the film because they refer to themselves as a collective, and also they've gathered to hear Ayn's work in progress, which again is historically accurate. They did this once a week, and at that time in 1955, she was writing Atlas Shrugged. And what's interesting about Atlas Shrugged is that it begins with what Ayn Rand refers to as the men of the mind going on strike against the world. So these could be entrepreneurs, these could be artists, basically frustrated with social structures of the world, kind of pinning them down right and not letting them actually reach their individual ideal goals, so they turn their back on the world and they kind of refuse it. But of course, that's kind of the appropriation of the workers' strike. So I think there's just these weird moments, like in the beginning, where you see this kind of maybe distasteful appropriation of collectivity and also a strike.
Yeah, right. It's maybe not too far-fetched to say that it is a political film. It puts forward a really strong political ideas, and what I find really interesting is that these ideas and this politics that is in this film, Contra Internet, it's very strongly linked with sexuality. I mean, we see like basically the film climaxes in an orgasmic scene, let's say. So can you tell us a bit more about what exactly is the relationship and what fascinated you about bringing these things all together, because it's a very rich.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think, you're right. Like, actually, I would say it's absolutely a film about philosophy and politics, ultimately. I mean, for over a decade, I've been making work that's very much about queerness and feminism in relationship to emerging science and technology. So that's just kind of like a thread I've been following for a really long time. And I really just wanted to make this work that just kind of took a queer angle on critiquing and engaging Silicon Valley. And I think just taking a cue from Jarman, what I really love about Jubilee is the militancy. Even if it's framed, and of course, like, my film is also, like, comedic as well, but there's this kind of dark comedy element to Jarman where you have, people are getting executed. You see, what's so striking about that in the original Jubilee is that it was released in 1978. It was called Jubilee because that was the year of Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee, which means 25 years of reign, and she's, like, brutally executed in that film. So I think to kind of carry forth, I felt doing any kind of engagement with Jarman required to bring and play with that kind of militancy.
Right.
And I think, like, this, just as there's this scene in Jarman where you see, like, the kind of baby stroller, like, burning and in flames, I think, the way that I deal with it is, like, burning different kinds of Silicon Valley iconography and different kinds of, like, technical components. But I just think there's, obviously there's such a clear kind of connection to the culture of Silicon Valley. So many things have come out now around that would align with, like, very kind of clear critiques of, like, maybe misogyny or...
Certainly.
But yeah, I think, like, what better than queerness, I think, to just, like, kind of go in and undermine the Silicon Valley enterprise. I was very excited about doing something like that. And I guess I could say one of the early philosophical or theoretical inspirations for me was Paul Preciado's Contrasexual Manifesto, which is actually the idea of Contra Internet is, like, let's say, like, a reshifting of this idea of contrasexuality. So it's already kind of embedded conceptually within the film.
Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, sure. So this manifesto, it's a beautiful concept. It's not that difficult to grasp. It doesn't mean against sexuality in some kind of totalizing puritanical sense. It means to have a relationship to sexuality that is not naturalized, that's not, let's say, heteronormative, or that it kind of defaults to some kind of heterosexual framework. It's, kind of trying to think of sexuality as something marked by power structures that has a kind of plastic, artificial dimension. And one of the elements that I found really exciting and inspiring about the Contrasexual Manifesto is there's this kind of beautiful theorization of the dildo, and Preciado calls this dildo tectonics. And I think you could say it's probably a controversial position to take, but what Preciado argues is that the dildo can't just be collapsed into a symbol for patriarchy. So Preciado, he makes a difference between, let's say, a penis and a dildo, and kind of claims the dildo for, like, a queer contrasexuality. And there's a whole kind of section in the manifesto where there's all these dildo tectonic exercises to experiment with the dildo in a more, let's say, abstract, diagrammatic, kind of theoretical sense. So this is why I wanted a dildo present, very much present in the film, to kind of reference and play with that. But that scene, what I could tell you with nootropics dancing at the end, there was kind of different references for that other than this dildo from Preciado. I think of it as a dildo fountain. And the kind of joke there is one of Ayn Rand's most well-known novels is called The Fountainhead. And the fountainhead, that word means like a kind of spring of creativity or inspiration. And so for me, that's my queer fountainhead, this kind of like gushing dildo fountain. And but the liquid, I think it's kind of like, you don't really know what it is. It's some kind of like spraying potentiality whose like possibilities you don't yet know what may bring. And I think a formal reference was Kenneth Anger's Ode d'Artifice.
Okay. I also kind of noticed, or maybe it's just my interpretation in the film, so an inspiration was Derek Jarman's Jubilee, then also in the main cast we see Susanne Sachse, whom like people who are familiar with queer core cinema, they definitely know her from Bruce LaBruce movies. So there are like all these queer pretexts and subtexts to the film. Was this like a deliberate thing that you wanted to play with?
I mean, typically when I make work, whether it's visual art or this film, I think of layers of reading. You know, and I think that's often the most interesting work, that you can have a very kind of surface reading, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense at all. It's just there's something you can skim from the surface of a surface engagement, but there are layers of depths, you know, if you want to kind of dive in, and of course that could be within the narrative structure, that could be aesthetically, formally, but of course it can also be in these more, maybe we say kind of like meta choices within the film, such as bringing in certain queer actors to play roles, which of course is something Derek Jarman did also with Jubilee, and that I felt very strongly about that. Like, you know, like, wouldn't it be so amazing if you're going to take on such a kind of awful conservative figure like Ayn Rand, but have Susanna perform her? And I think of Susanna's performance as a kind of micro camp. Like, it's just
definitely.
like there's just these like tiny little moments that just really, I think, kind of undo that character in a way that's fantastic, but also really captures kind of the spirit of Ayn Rand.
It uncovers like sort of like, I don't know, underlying little meanings that a queer audience can resonate with.
I think so. I hope so.
If we think about the project as a whole, would you argue, or would you be comfortable saying that it's maybe a queer resistance film?
I'm fine with that.
Yeah?
You can call it that, for sure. I mean, look, you've got like queer people executing Silicon Valley tech workers.
Totally.
And, kind of when, let's say like I think one of the more controversial elements in the film, which like I had to meet with a number of lawyers before I even did this in the film, is that there's a scene where Peter Thiel has been executed in front of his building in Palo Alto, California. And Peter Thiel, let's say, is a very powerful Silicon Valley figure who's known for suing people for doing any kind of defamation of his character. But he's dead. And when it cuts to Nootropics, played by Castles, the kind of implication there is that Castles is now at Peter Thiel's desk.
Yeah.
So I think it's safe to say
that
there's an element of queer resistance.
Well, Zach, thank you so much for being here and discussing this movie. I hope that you will have a really good time at the Berlinale, and just once again, congratulations on Contra Internet Jubilee 33.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.